Winter looks a whole lot better from inside an 84-degree water park, and there's no better place to enjoy the season than the Cartwright Resort and Indoor Water Park in New York's Sullivan Catskills. The Cartwright is located within a true winter wonderland with tons of activities, dining options, and New York's biggest indoor water park, where a one-night stay gets you 2 full days of water park fun. Don't let the season pass you by. Visit thecartwright.com to book your adventure.
Sign up for the Planet Fitness Black Card for $1 down, $24.99 a month, and get a free Amazon Halo fitness tracker. Deal ends March 15th. 12-month commitment applies. See Home Club for details.
This episode is brought to you in part by the Needle Kuda Law Firm, guidance that moves lives forward.
Welcome back to another episode of Divorce Doesn't Suck. I'm Wendy Sloan with my co-host Daniel Harold, and we're back with our 4th of our 12-part series. Daniel, I just have to say that I'm loving your glasses today.
Well, I'm trying to get them to sponsor us. They've sponsored me on a lot of other stuff, but it was one of the, and you don't wear readers. I just woke up one morning and I couldn't see anything on my phone. I don't yet. I have 20/20 vision. It's a miracle. I don't know how, but I do. Well, it's like a light switch. You'll wake up and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't see my phone. And then call me and I'll get you hooked up with this brand, which I'm not going to mention until they advertise. Well, let me tell you, they look these are my absolute favorites so far. Okay, cool. They're big blocky ones for the listeners that can't see. Yeah, but they look good. So anyway, Daniel looks really good. Maybe he'll take a picture later and he'll show us. Anyway, welcome to the special edition. It's our 4th of our 12-part series, Mapping Your New Path Forward with Melissa Needle of Needle Kuda Divorce and Family Law. Today, we're going to be talking about both the financial and the family landscape of divorce. And this includes custody, evaluating assets and property, documenting income. We're going to cover the full grasp, but I have to say, I'll probably get a little bit emotional about the custody part. I think that's one of the hardest parts. Welcome back, Melissa. And I know it's the golden rule, best interest of the children. We'll talk about that too.
Yes, we will. Good morning to both of you. Happy Friday. I'm
to
happy
you as well.
To be here.
Happy to have you back. I can't believe it's our 4th edition of this.
I know.
I think it seems like we've done more. I think because we do a lot of talking off air. So we've really I've gotten to know you, Melissa. Obviously, Wendy, you know Melissa well, but it seems like we've done a dozen of these. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel very comfortable chatting with the two of you.
You're like a pro now.
You're very good at what you do, I have to say, both of you. So kudos to you both on your excellent podcasting skills.
Back at you, Melissa. Yeah, and you're a wealth of information for our listeners too. I mean, everyone says that they've learned a lot.
Good. I'm glad. I'm happy that I can help people out there who have questions. It's my pleasure to be here.
And the cool thing about this is it's almost like we're creating this library because we're kind of going in order of the divorce process. And I think it'll be such a great reference point for people jumping into divorce as we're promoting this series to say, start at episode 1 because it kind of goes in order. It's really cool. I don't know if any other podcast has done something like this. I think they bounce around on various topics, but I love the idea that we've got this continuity of really kind of going from A to Z in the divorce process.
Well, that's exactly what we planned when we started collaborating, is that we knew that I would be on several times and we wanted to do something that would educate listeners from the beginning to selecting a lawyer all the way, through the entirety of the process, both, in process and what you should be thinking of in terms of timing and in substance as well. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the way we designed it.
This lives on forever, so they can go back and listen to any of the episodes that they feel fits them, or all of them, hopefully all of them. All right, let's get into it.
Okay.
One of the hardest parts of divorce.
Yes, I always say to my clients, there's 3 buckets that you need to think about. And I think I talked about this on an earlier podcast. And one of the 3 buckets is the custody bucket. And I always lead with that because, in my opinion, It is the most important bucket because you're talking about the health and the well-being of your children. And let's face it, I mean, Wendy, we've been through this together. What is more important than that? Nothing. The money, the support, all of that is very important, but your kids, that is your life, that is your heart. So it is really the most important aspect of getting divorced, and you want to make sure that the decisions that you make are the right decisions for your children, because it has a long-lasting effect on them.
And our natural instinct is to protect our children, right? So Melissa, what happens? Like, walk us through the whole thing, and we can talk about what legal custody is, what physical custody is, but where does one start with this?
Okay, I usually tell people, there's two primary parts of custody. And the first part is the legal aspect and who will get to make major decisions. And the second part is the physical custody. Where will the children live and what will the schedule of access between the parents look like? In every case, it's different. So it's hard for me to give you a general overview, but because every family is different, every family dynamic is different. Children have different needs at different ages. Parents have different skills. They have different jobs. They might live in different neighborhoods, different states, etc. So there is no cookie cutter solution when it comes to custody. And that's why getting to know your divorce lawyer, which is another segment that we did, is important. You need to be able to communicate effectively with your lawyer so that your lawyer can help you define what your goals are and what obstacles may exist. So for example, if we're talking about a situation where children are, 2 and 4 years old, it's very different than when children are 14 and 16 years old. So it makes a big difference. It depends if one parent is in Connecticut and another parent maybe is in Texas. There's just so many different issues that can arise. Lots of children might have some sort of challenges. They might have learning disability, educational challenges, health issues. A parent might have substance abuse, and the other parent is concerned about their ability to care for the parent. So you need to be able to take a step back, figure out what your concerns are, and communicate it effectively with your lawyer so that a game plan or a strategy can be implemented to make sure that your children's best interests are eventually satisfied.
I love what you said about the age it's different depending on the age of your kids, because in my case, Melissa, I had one that was in college and two that were, into high school. And my ex and I sat down and we were like, do they really need to have two physical homes where they're having, we hardly see the kids anyway, while we were married, because they have cars and they've got all these activities. And we made a decision that they would have one bedroom, a place to stay, which was going to be with their mom. And then we negotiated what the visitation was for me. And I would, they'd come see me, we'd spend time, and then they'd go back to their room. And I just felt like it just was so less disruptive for them in a very difficult time, because bouncing back and forth is really hard, regardless of what age.
It is, but I have to say, Daniel, you and your ex-wife are the exception and not the rule. There are very, very few parents who put their needs aside for the needs of their children. And it really takes two parents to do what you and your ex-wife did. You both have to be supportive of one another. You have to be comfortable and confident in your relationship with your children, to agree not to sleep in the same home with them on a regular basis. You have to have confidence in the other spouse's ability to support the relationship between you and your wife. And that is a very, very rare bird. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Do you feel like a lot of the contests that occur, I feel like there's so much emotion involved that it's a lot of it is not for the benefit of the kids, but more for winning or making the jab with the ex if it's a highly contested divorce? Do you see a lot of that where they're not really looking for the best, the best for their kids? It's more about winning, or maybe it's just more about winning for them at that point.
I mean, with all due respect, Daniel, I don't think it's quite that simple. It really isn't. I think that it is a very emotionally charged area of a divorce, if not the most emotionally charged area of the divorce. And I think people have different perceptions about what's best for their children. And it doesn't mean that they're right or they're wrong, but people are very convicted about what is best for their children. And the reason people are getting divorced is because they don't see eye to eye with one another. So it's not surprising to think that they won't see eye to eye on what's best for their children in terms of, maybe a schedule, or maybe what school they should attend, or what activities they should participate in. There's a wide range of issues that come up. And it's not always because the parents just want to disagree with one another, although oftentimes that is the case. But sometimes I just believe there is a genuine disagreement about what's best. So, for example, if there is a parent, let's go the traditional route and say it was the dad that is the breadwinner, and he has to commute and his hours are very long, and he is only able to see his children during weekend time. And that doesn't mean he doesn't love his children. It means that he's got responsibilities that relate to the finances of the family, and his job has certain demands, and he has limited time with the children. And he has a spouse or an ex-spouse who spends a lot of time with the children and wants the children to participate in activities. And let's say one of the activities is baseball. And let's say there's a travel baseball team. And let's say they have more than one child, and the other child is a younger child, and let's say a different gender. So let's say the boy plays baseball, the son plays baseball, and the daughter doesn't. What is the father supposed to do on his limited weekend time? Is he supposed to travel with his son and really not get to see him or have really a meaningful relationship with him? Does he bring the daughter to all of the travel games? There's no easy answer. And the mom wants the son to play baseball because he's always played baseball and he enjoys it, and some of his friends are on it. So she's not wrong. Dad's not wrong. And they just see differently in terms of what's best for the children. So it's not always clear cut where the parents are unable to step back and do what's best for the children. Sometimes it's not so simple. And that's why it's important to have a lawyer that can understand your position and is able to really fight for it.
And it's interesting. People get divorced, and you're fighting with each other. But what in the end, you're going to be together until your kids age out and then past that. So you're going to have to be in this together. So if people would just remember that before they start getting into the boxing ring with each other, it would probably make life a lot simpler. I personally didn't go through a custody with my ex had every other weekend, the typical I think that's the typical divorce, right? A dinner and then every other weekend. It was hard for me to let go. I'm used to them being in my life and me running everything. And it was very, very difficult time for me to let go. And I had to be supportive of him and his relationship with the kids. It's not easy. It's
No,
not easy. It's the hard, I think it's the hardest thing. And, the kids, you don't want to change. They have to adapt to the parents who's taking care of them, but you don't want to change the kid's life because the divorce wasn't their fault.
yes.
Very
That is very true. And I always, I think what a really good solution in that, in a divorcing family, is if the parents can live close by, geographically in the same community, even in the same neighborhood when the kids are really little. It makes the back and forth a little bit more seamless. And if the kids start when they're younger, going back and forth and having 2 bedrooms. I mean, Daniel, you mentioned your children were already, in the high school years and sort of set in their way and becoming these little independent people who want nothing to do with their parents, as they should. It's their time to sort of become more independent and recognize that they can function without their parents developmentally. But when kids are little, if parents who are divorcing can live in close proximity to each other, it makes the back and forth a lot easier. And I often discuss that, especially if I am representing the parent who is the non-primary caretaker of the children, who wants to be extremely engaged in the lives of their children. It makes it much easier. And there does come a time when children's voice really does matter. Even if legally it might not be the end all be all, but it's difficult to put a 15-year-old in the back of a car and say, you're going to mom's house or you're going to dad's house. I mean, it's just not realistic.
Yeah.
If you can live close to each other, if you become really engaged and embrace the children's lives and the community and their friends and their academics and their extracurriculars, then I think that lends itself to both parents being equally involved in a child's life. And sometimes it's not always possible. And that's just life. That's just the way it is.
What do you say about communicating with the kids when they're with the other parent and the transitions?
Yeah. So, well, they're 2 very different things. Okay. So let's start with transitions. Transitions really tell the children a lot about their parents' relationship. Okay. If parents have a high conflict divorce where they can't even stand to look at each other, and again, it might be for a finite period of time while you're going through this process where emotions are so intense. But during that period of time, if you have a family where the parents really disdain each other, it's best for the children if the transitions happen at school or at an activity, so the parents are not doing the actual exchange. Because sometimes it's difficult for a child to let go of one parent and go to another parent. And so that if the exchange happens at school or an activity, then that becomes a non-issue, because they're not saying goodbye, mom, and going off to dad. They're being picked up at their activity as all their friends are being picked up, and it makes it much easier. I also say, if you have a decent relationship with your spouse or ex-spouse, it might be a good time during the transition to show your children that we might not be married to each other, but we both love you and we're a different type of family now. And it doesn't, you can have conversations about the kids. You can, talk to the kids together at the same time. You can be on the same page so that your kids can see that there is a united front in my mom and my dad, even if they're not together anymore. Mm-hmm. So it can be an opportunity to exhibit good behavior for your children, to give them confidence that everything is going to be okay. So it really depends. If you're not confident that you can, be civil and kind and united with your spouse or ex-spouse, then I highly recommend that the transitions not occur between the two of you, because it can be a recipe for disaster. And if that is the situation where you're required to be together, you really sort of have to take a deep breath before it happens, and behave yourself. Because if you don't, it's going to impact you negatively in your divorce. And probably more importantly, it's going to impact your children negatively. And it's going to have some long-lasting repercussions on your children. So I always tell my clients, be on your best behavior. If you have something to say to your spouse, don't say it during the transition. Wait until after the transition.
Yeah.
And either call them, text them, email them. But again, always be careful what you're texting, what you're emailing, because it will be used as evidence in the future.
Evidence.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, can what you say, if you're saying derogatory things about your ex to your kids, can your kids get deposed on things like that if the other ex found out that certain things were being said?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I'm very, not in Connecticut where I practice. That would not
obviously
happen.
It's bad practice to talk negatively about your soon-to-be ex-spouse to your kids, which I think a lot of people sometimes unfortunately do. But I was just curious if there's any legal ramifications for doing that.
Yeah, there are, but having a child deposed is rather extreme. That puts the child right in the center of the conflict.
Yeah, right.
And I don't think that, there may be some lawyers that would do that, but if that happened and you filed some sort of motion with the court, I don't think most judges would permit that. But what can happen is if you sense that your spouse or ex-spouse is saying derogatory things about you to your children, there are other ways of ascertaining that information without putting your children in the middle of the conflict through a deposition.
Yeah, great point.
They, and just by way of example, there are several things that you can do. You could talk to their therapist. You can have an attorney or guardian appointed on their behalf. And we can talk in more detail about that.
If you just tuned in, we're talking to attorney Melissa Needle of Needle Kuda Divorce and Family Law, Mapping Your New Path Forward, our fourth of our 12-part series. We'll be right back right after this break. Needle Kuda Divorce and Family Law attorneys have helped Connecticut families through this process for over 30 years. They understand divorce is so much more than the legal dissolution of a marriage. Divorce is about finding and accepting a new path forward, defining your new family, and securing an enforceable agreement that secures your future. Their experienced attorneys and paralegals are first and foremost committed husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons, who are all devoted to protecting Connecticut families. Put the strength, wisdom, and experience of Needle Kuda behind you and move forward with confidence. Visit them at needlekuda.com. We're back and we're talking about child custody, and we're going to continue talking about child custody. We're going to go into the AMCs and the GALs after we finish talking about the communication between the parents and transitions.
Right. So we did talk about transitions. And now we'll get on to communication between the parents. Again, it depends on the dynamic that exists within the family unit, and in particular with between the parents. A lot of parents can talk effectively with one another, and there's seamless co-parenting. And if that's the situation, then they could talk in any manner that is most effective. They can email, they can text, they can call each other on the phone. But I think really what our audience wants to hear is the other extreme. What happens if you have a spouse that is difficult to communicate with? What happens if you have a spouse who doesn't respond to you? What happens if you have a spouse who is texting you 20, 30 times a day? You know, there are all sorts of issues that arise. And depending on the details, there's different mechanisms that can be put in place. If you feel that your spouse is texting you too often, then we can request that the texts be limited, maybe one a day at the end of the day. Organize all of your thoughts and send one text or one email. If you feel that your spouse is not responding, what I often say to my clients is frame a question such as, if I don't hear back from you by 5 o'clock tomorrow, I will assume that you have no issue with Joey being signed up for orchestra, and that you will contribute your 50% of the cost, and you will take him to his practices on the day that you are parenting him.
And you're going to get a response.
That's
then.
a great piece of advice. You're going to get a response right at that time, right? Right back.
Right. And then, you know, if they don't respond, then you have their tacit approval to proceed. And that really is in the child's best interest to know one way or the other.
Right.
Because Joey is probably saying to mom, can I do orchestra? Can I do orchestra? Can I do orchestra? And it's difficult to say, well, I don't know, you know, dad hasn't responded. I mean, that paints dad in a poor light. It puts the child in the middle of the conflict. And at the same time, the child, you want to manage their expectations, and young kids do best when they know what's ahead and they have routine. So you don't want to just put it off. So there's so many different reasons that an email or a text, like I just said, giving a deadline is a critical thing to do if you're engaged with a spouse or an ex-spouse who is non-responsive. And it happens all the time.
I like what you said right there too. Routine is so important for children.
Yeah,
for adults too. Routine is important.
Right, exactly.
Well, so what happens at the very extreme when, you know, they both can't agree on any decisions? Because I've heard of, like, then the courts kind of get involved, right? Aren't there court monitoring of communication? I know there's some apps, you know, to the very extreme where you have to communicate through the app.
Yeah, there's some really great apps out there, and whenever there's a high conflict divorce, someone, whether it's the mom's lawyer, the dad's lawyer, the GAL, the AMC, the judge, family relations, will suggest utilizing one of these apps to communicate with each other. And the reason that these apps work so well is that all of the communications are on one platform. We all do it. Sometimes we email, sometimes we text, sometimes we call. I have some clients that use WhatsApp. I mean, there's all different platforms that people communicate on. And it could get very confusing. And sometimes you have one spouse saying, well, I checked my email, I checked my text, but I didn't know you emailed me, or vice versa. So The other benefit about these apps are they're very easy to download, and you could give access to other people to read them. So if there is a GAL or an AMC involved, an attorney for a minor child or guardian ad litem for the children, they can get the username and password, and they can view the communications between the parents. And oftentimes, if I'm representing mom or dad, I want access to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And mom and dad both understand other people are going to be reading their emails. Other people can get right on the platform and see what's going on. And it makes everyone be on their best behavior.
I think that's smart, huh? Very smart.
It's very smart. Some of the apps have a small annual fee. It's well worth the money. Talking about like couple $100 a year. And some of the apps also have a tone meter, which I love.
Oh, wow.
Because a lot of problems don't always come with the substance of what's said, but the way it's said. And I know that everyone's heard, when you email, a lot gets lost in translation. The tone might be off. That's not what I meant. I'm sorry if you took it that way. So some of these apps have a tone meter that tell you if your tone is too harsh, too direct. And so it can really help in terms of the communication between spouses or ex-spouses.
I was going to comment that is a wonderful thing. I could send that to a few of my friends, actually.
Yeah, actually.
My friend sends me, if I don't respond to her, I'm just saying this, question mark, question mark, question mark. I'm like,
yeah, wouldn't it be funny if the people that are viewing the conversations can put little emojis with each text, like a thumbs down or a question mark?
Right.
I wish I had that when I was getting divorced. I wish I had the app, or I wish I had something that, because I know I can fast text and it could get thrown out of, can go in 12 different directions. But by the time I sent all my emails and all my texts, and this is to first, second, and third lawyer, not fourth lawyer, Melissa Needle, it was crazy. So that would have been a beautiful thing, knowing that people are listening and everyone might be a lot calmer. That should be mandatory, I think.
Yeah. We use it quite a bit. I mean, there are situations where there's not issues with communicating between parents, but otherwise, typically, it's one of the first things that's recommended. And it really does make, and some people can't help themselves, and they're still, exhibit bad behavior. And that's a real red flag. And it's also very helpful. If this is the way someone is emailing or texting on this platform when they know they're under a microscope, my goodness, how are they going to behave when they're not? So it really is very useful on many, many different levels.
We've mentioned GALs and AMCs a lot. Can we get into that a little bit? We're not going to have time on this episode to talk about the income, the assets, and the divisions and all that. So we're going to make that the 5th series that we're going to come back with next month. GALs and AMCs. Right.
So typically what will happen is if there is a high conflict custody case, a representative will be appointed so that the children's interests are known. And depending on not just the age, but the maturity of the children will determine whether or not it's a guardian or an attorney for the children. Sometimes you have both, okay? So, and the difference is, but they both have very different roles. So I'd like to just take a minute or two to explain the different roles of a guardian and an attorney for the children. Okay, so a guardian ad litem is a person who is appointed to represent what they believe is the best interests of the children. And a guardian is appointed when a child is too young and not mature enough to be able to articulate or express what is in their best interest. or even if they are old enough, mature enough to express what's in their best interest, sometimes children are too engaged, involved in the conflict between their parents.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a 15-year-old feels the need to protect mom because dad left for another woman, and will do or say whatever they have to say because he or she feels the need to side with mom, they might have a guardian appointed, because even though they can articulate what they want might not be in their best interest.
Right.
An attorney for a child is appointed in situations where you have children who are old enough, mature enough, wise enough to articulate what they feel is in their own best interests. And that could be a child who is 13, or it could be a child who's 17. So it really just depends on the individual child. And sometimes parents will fight. Well, should a guardian be appointed or should an attorney be appointed? In some situations, both are appointed. And typically, the guardian and the attorney will speak to each other. And sometimes they won't say the same thing. So the guardian will say what they believe is in the child's best interest, but the attorney for the minor child is charged with saying what the child wants. And that can be at odds. So it can get very complicated, and it's very important to think very carefully about what it is you're trying to accomplish, what the issues are, who your child is, and other factors when trying to determine whether or not an attorney or a guardian should be appointed.
What happens when they're at odds? Who decides then? Is it the judge or is it
judge? Yeah, the judge typically would listen to the guardian, I think, more than the attorney, because the guardian doesn't have any skin in the game. The guardian's job as an adult who supposedly is an objective party, who has spoken to the parents and the therapist and friends and the child or children, can then assess the information that they've collected after doing their due diligence and investigation, and they express what they feel is best for the child. And the attorney just simply represents what the child wants.
Melissa, I have a question about mental health, because I think a lot of times with respect to the kids going through a trauma like this, mental health issues emerge that may have not emerged prior to the trauma of the divorce. And, there's lots of examples in some of the people that I've talked to where a lot of times there's disputes with the spouses as far as treatment and medication. Some people don't want their kids to go see a therapist, while the other is a huge advocate for it. How do you maybe speak to the mental health aspect of the kids and how those issues are handled?
Yeah, I see it quite a bit in my practice where you have one parent who is a proponent of mental health support and another parent who is not. And even if they can agree on mental health support, there is often a divide in terms of medicating a child. And there can be lots of issues with regard to that. And typically when that's a case, you can have, if there's a guardian appointed, the guardian can then speak to the mental health professionals and get their points of view as to what the issues with the child are, to determine whether or not therapy would be a support to the child. And in terms of medication, what is the reason that the medication is being recommended or prescribed? And oftentimes, if parents can't agree and there is a joint custody situation, the judge will have to make that decision. And whenever I sense from my client that this is going to be an issue, I often fight for sole custody or final decision making when it comes to medical health decisions. And it is not unusual when there is a great divide to be a split where, it's joint legal custody, but mom gets to make final decisions when it comes to medical decisions. Because it's really not fair for the child to be caught in the middle, because ultimately what happens is nothing. The child's needs aren't being met because there is a standstill between the parents. So it's not unusual to say, okay, well, if you see this as an issue, client, this is what I recommend we go for, and this is why. And even if you can't reach an agreement or you don't win initially, if it continues to be an issue subsequent to the divorce, the judge will see in the file that this was an issue. This was an issue that one of the parents tried to resolve. This was the solution that this parent had. And maybe it was an error not granting it. The judge may have been hopeful that the parents would have been able to get on the same page.
Right. And maybe the child gets worse over time. And so there's a need to bring that up again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it is something that we see quite a bit. And I see it much more often now than I did even 10, 15 years ago, because mental health issues and mental health support is not as taboo or uncommon as it used to be.
Yeah.
And in fact, my experience is that judges really look positively on either litigants, spouses that have mental health support, and children. This is a very difficult process. The family is breaking up, and it can be very traumatic, even in the best of situations for children. And having mental health support and having a safe venue for them to be able to express themselves may be important. And that's another issue, is what type of mental health help or support will the children have? Will the parents agree that the mental health support will be completely isolated from the divorce process, so that even a guardian ad litem, if appointed for the child, can't talk to the mental health therapist? And that way the child might understand that no matter what they say, it's confidential. It's never going to get back to mom or dad, because you don't want the mental health support that you're giving your child to be used as a weapon in the divorce process. And I think that is the reticence often to parents agreeing for the child to be supported by a mental health professional, because they're afraid it's going to be used against them in the divorce process. So, I mean, we could talk for days about this topic.
It was a very, very good question. Very good.
It's a big issue. And I remember with my kids, we were both on the same page as far as getting them the mental health they needed, and they needed it at different stages too. It just wasn't, okay, the trauma is occurring, everybody needs help. A lot of it happened a couple of years later. Behavior started to trigger, and it's important, again, to communicate with your spouse and hopefully be on the same page to put your kids first and to get them the help that they need.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, being a kid nowadays is tough. It's not just the divorce. The divorce adds a layer to it, but it might be the divorce plus something else. They might have been okay with the divorce, and then something happened, and it's just too much, everything together. So, being in tune with your children and getting them the support that they need, and sometimes it does need to be used in the divorce process because it's the only way to elicit information from the children. But sometimes, depending on the needs of your children, making certain that they have a safe, private venue to address any emotional concerns, issues that they're feeling is what's important. And it could shift, as you said, Daniel, over time. Life is fluid.
That's right.
Right.
In this episode, we talked about child custody, and I think we can do another series on child custody because there's so much
We
to talk
could.
about. It's not an easy subject. And remember what we said at the very beginning, and it's on Melissa's website too. The golden rule is the best interest of the child. We have to always keep that in mind. There was so much useful information here. Melissa, I think we're going to have to talk more about this next time.
Anytime. You tell me what you want to talk about, and I will share my experience with the listeners. I'm happy to do
Such
it.
a wealth
So
of
much
knowledge.
of it. This is our fourth of our 12-part series, Mapping Your New Path Forward with attorney Melissa Needle of Needle Kuda Divorce and Family Law. Once again, this is so helpful, and our listeners can go back and listen to the first, second, third, fourth, and we're going to continue on with this. Thank you
Great.
so much, Melissa.